Hello, this is Mike Wheeler again, and today we're going to talk about week 2, which is going to be OSHA and government health and safety regulations. Um, so this is kind of a dry subject, but I think it's a pretty critical one. OSHA being the main enforcer and governing body of workplace safety for most places. So, and a little history about how they came about is kind of interesting as well. We're also going to talk about in this unit safety data sheets and the Hazcom standard that OSHA has. And yeah, so let's get to it. So objectives at the end of this lesson should be able to state the purpose of OSHA and briefly explain its history, know your rights under the OSHA Act, explain what to do in a dangerous work situation, explain how you can keep your workplace in compliance with OSHA, explain the functions of Niosh and the EPA. That's the 4 main objectives of OSHA's Hazcom standards, and list the information that can be found on a material SDS or a safety data sheet. So OSHA. OSHA was formally created in 1970, signed into law by President Nixon. At the time, in 1970, 14,000 workers a year were being killed on the job. So in 2019, there was 5,000 and change killed on the job, despite the total number of hours worked more than doubling. So the effect OSHA has had on workplace fatalities is just monumental. So looking back in history, OSHA was people badmouth OSHA all the time, but it was really a greatly needed thing. So if we go way back, Massachusetts was the first state to have any kind of workplace safety laws, and that was in 1887. Up before that point, there was virtually nothing. And then the labor movement that came about around the same time, around the turn of the century, that was one of the pillars they were built on was worker safety, because at the time that was a huge issue. The labor unions have gone on to do way more stuff than that and different stuff than that, but they were originally really focused on worker safety. So the next step was the Department of Labor was created in 1913, and then in 1933 the Bureau of Labor Standards was created, and a lot of that ended up being what OSHA does today. So OSHA is the enforcement arm of the Department of Labor, has the authority to inspect nearly every job site in the nation for unsafe conditions and acts. OSHA also conducts investigations where workers have been seriously injured or killed to find the root cause of the accident. So, funny story, our college here is not covered by OSHA. As a state institution, we're actually covered by the Idaho State Building Code. And so instead of OSHA inspectors, we have Idaho State building inspectors come out and inspect our workplace for unsafe conditions. So it's just one of those weird things. We're going to talk a ton about OSHA in the lab. We're actually not covered by OSHA. We're covered by a different organization. So enforcement of safety rules and regulations. So OSHA does not have the authority to discipline you if you violate the rules or regulations. They punish your employer instead. They can do this through fines, or even if it's bad enough, criminal prosecution. The reason for that is because it's the employer's responsibility. They are responsible for your actions. So if you are doing the wrong thing, OSHA says it's either because they didn't train you right, or they didn't give you the oversight or the information you needed to do the job. Your employer has a right to discipline you if you violate workplace safety or health rules, whether they're OSHA or not. It doesn't matter if something's okay with OSHA. If it violates your company policy, they can still discipline you. There's a link down here to OSHA workers' rights. I'm not going to go through it. It's a not too long pamphlet. Look through it. It's good information. So shop safety. In addition to OSHA rules, your employer may have their own rules covering different processes and procedures. OSHA covers just about everything, but a lot of places go above what OSHA requires as the minimum. So your employer will have these rules and regulations. It's their responsibility to train you to them. They can't just, they have to give you the information you need to do the job correctly. So they've got to tell you what the rules are. They've got to tell you how to do it safely. It's also the employer's responsibility to train you how to use specific things, such as crane, forklifts, some kind of machineries. That's why a lot of times, even if you've driven a forklift for 20 years, you go to a job site and they're still going to put you through forklift training. because they want a record that you went through their training. It helps them cover their bases in case there's ever an issue. There may also be specific training or even medical testing for some PPE. And respirators are a really good example of this. People will, people just go down and buy like certified respirators and wear them. To OSHA, if your shop is going to issue you a respirator, you have to have a medical examination to make sure your lungs are capable of dealing with breathing through a respirator, and then you have to be fit tested to make sure it actually fits your face. Most respirators come in a variety of sizes for big faces, small faces, all that kind of stuff. So, and a lot of times it's not that easy. You can't just go out and buy a respirator and use it and have it work. Per OSHA, you need to be tested, and you need to be trained how to use it and maintain it. So it is your responsibility to pay attention to this training and follow it at all times. That's why they do it. They're giving you this information for a reason. The best way to keep you and your coworkers safe is to be proactive. Don't wait until something happens to take action on an unsafe situation. I don't know how many times, like, I myself have ended up, cutting myself or, breaking something and immediately thinking, man, I knew that was going to happen, right? I didn't stop, take a minute, fix what I needed to fix to do the job safely. If you see, take care of it beforehand. That's the best way to deal with it. Realize that every process can be improved and there's always better ways to do something. A lot of times, welders can be pretty stubborn. And if I've done something 100 times my way, when somebody comes up to me and says, hey, if you try doing it this way, I don't want to hear it. But we need to listen, because, a different point of view, the guy might not know what he's talking about, but he might, and it's worth listening to him. You need to be open to new ideas, new ways to perform a task. It's right along with that. Try it, try it. What's it going to hurt? If it ends up being better, great. If not, you wasted one cycle time figuring out it doesn't work, and you can try to get better the next time. And also be positive about safety. Negativity, in a shop is bad. It just spreads like cancer, and it's just a really defeatist attitude. Take pride in what you're doing, and that means doing it safely and correctly. You'll hear me say 100 times this year, a big part of professionalism is safety. If you're not worried about safety, if you're not being safe, you're not being professional, because you're not taking the job seriously. So what to do in unsafe work conditions or unsafe work situations? If you find yourself on the job and you feel the task isn't safe, there's a couple of different roads you can go down. First thing you need to do is let your supervisor know what's going on and why you think it's unsafe, and ask them if they can eliminate the hazard. So that whole explain why is a big part of why we have this course, because you need to be able to communicate effectively about safety in the workplace. Saying, hey, this is all screwed up and I don't like it, that doesn't work. You have to say, well, a fall from this height could do this. I'd feel a lot safer if I was tied off to something. I don't know if this tie-off point will support, somebody. What can we do about this? You need to be able to communicate effectively. And your first line of defense is go to your supervisor and see if they'll fix it. If that doesn't work, it's fine, don't worry about it. If you're still concerned, if they don't, assuage your fears, follow the chain of command. You can either talk to, most places have a safety officer or a safety person, and if not, go to the supervisor above yours. At this point, realize you're probably going to be stepping on somebody's toes, but you might be saving your life. You might be saving somebody else's life down the road. If you believe a situation is dangerous, employer does not, you can explain the reasoning and refuse to perform the task. So tell them, hey, I'm not going to do this job, and here's why. So at that point, you'll probably get fired. But OSHA will protect you. I had a former coworker of mine, worked at a different shop, and he was welding a bunch of stainless steel, and he thought he needed a respirator for that work, and they wouldn't buy him a respirator. They said, no, you're fine, you don't need a respirator. And he said, no, I need a respirator. The hexavalent chromium being released, I need a respirator. And they said, nope. And he said, well, I'm not going in there and welding it. And they fired him. Well, he went to OSHA, and they did the investigation, and the company he used to work for ended up cutting him a big check because they fired him unlawfully. So there is protection. It's just going to take time to get resolution. So just realize that. But there's not a job worth doing that is worth dying for. And it's we're building stuff out of steel. It's not like don't risk your life for that. It's not worth it. OSHA's Hazardous Communication Standard. So this has changed over the last 20 years. Has changed significantly. They used to be called Sds Sheets. Now they're just Sds Sheets. The Hazcom Standard was designed to reduce workplace injuries, require chemical manufacturers and distributors to identify chemicals, communicate chemical hazards to all individuals, and replace the state right to know programs with a uniform federal standard. So in this whole Hazcom thing, we talk a lot about chemicals, and that was one of the big pushes for the creation of OSHA. Is that post World War II, they had what was called the chemical revolution, where all of these new chemicals were being developed and used in industry, and people were getting really hurt and dying from exposure to these chemicals. They didn't know, long-term health effects. They didn't know half of them. They didn't know short-term health effects. But with all these new chemicals coming out of the market, that was one of the big pushes for OSHA, is that there had to be some way to regulate this stuff. So key parts of the Hazcom Standard is safety data sheets for every chemical on a work site has to be available to review it at any time. All the containers you've got in the shop have to be labeled for the content. So, a spray bottle with water in it has to say water on it. All chemicals must be inventoried, and this inventory should be available. So when OSHA comes, they can say, hey, how many bottles of this do you have on site? Then all employees must be trained to recognize and safely handle all chemicals at work. So that's another thing, your employer's responsible for giving you training for the chemicals you're going to work with. There's an OSHA SDS video, watch link to. It's pretty dry, but it's good material. So SDS sheets, they contain physical and safety information about the chemicals used in the workplace, organized into sections, and it's identification, hazard information, all this kind of stuff. Some of the stuff down here, ecological information, disposal considerations, are not mandatory, but you're seeing it more and more as the environmental side of chemical use is getting bigger and bigger. They're adding it to more and more stuff. OSHA, Niosh, Ansi, and the EPA. So OSHA is the regulatory body, the enforcement body, right? Well, OSHA doesn't do the research to determine how much of a chemical is dangerous, or how strong your safety glasses need to be safe running a grinder, or how good the steel toe of your boot needs to be to work in a steel shop. They rely on other federal agencies to do that, and a couple of them are Niosh and Ansi. So Niosh provides technical information to workers related to PPE requirements and hazardous substances. They do sometimes conduct hazard evaluation on site. They worry a lot about occupational hygiene, and that's not like if you put deodorant on or not. It's chemical containment, all that kind of thing. They do research on chemicals and hazards, and so when OSHA has a limit of exposure, like you can only be exposed to this many parts per million or something, all those numbers come from Niosh. And then they test and certify PPE equipment. So your respirators are going to be Niosh, usually Niosh certified. ANSI, on the other hand, deals with more of the physical issues, safety glasses, steel-toed boots, all that kind of stuff, hearing protection. They're not, and again, like Niosh, they're not an enforcement agency, but they're a research and standards organization that works with OSHA. So when you see something as OSHA certified, well, it may be OSHA certified, but it's certified because Niosh or ANSI certified it, and OSHA went along with that. The last one is EPA, and everybody knows what the EPA is, Environmental Protection Agency. They work hand in hand with OSHA because so much of the chemical exposures that OSHA sees will have overlap with the EPA. If somebody is exposed to something, it's because it usually came out of its container, and the EPA needs to be involved too. The EPA and OSHA will conduct mutual accident investigations depending on what it is, or OSHA will call them in. They'll investigating somebody's chemical exposure and see something that leads them to need to call the EPA in. Wrap up. So key ideas. OSHA is a government agency founded to protect workers and reduce workplace injuries and fatalities. Your workplace is responsible for meeting OSHA rules and standards, but you are responsible for following the rules and reporting unsafe conditions to your supervisors. Good employees and workplace safety programs are proactive, they're not reactive. They don't wait until somebody gets hurt to do something. They look for opportunities to fix problems that haven't injured somebody yet. And that's really the key thing is, don't wait till somebody trips over something to fix it. Fix a trip hazard before somebody gets hurt. Find a hazard on the job, fix it. If you can't do it yourself, inform your supervisor, follow the chain of command. You do have the right to refuse to do a job that's not safe. OSHA can protect you, because you'll probably face repercussions on the job. And I've worked with people that thought, what is safe is different, right? What I feel is safe, another person might feel is unsafe. That's why you need to understand OSHA, and you need to understand the rules, because if you tell your boss, no, I'm not going to do it because it's not safe. Well, if OSHA says it's safe, your employer can require you to do it. So you need to know, you need to have all the information before you make that decision. If your workplace will not fix an unsafe situation or takes action against you, you can contact OSHA. They will help protect you if they can. OSHA, Hazcom, and SDS are the backbone of chemical protection in the workplace. You need to know what you're working with. Chemical exposure is one of those things that, and we've got a whole chapter on it. It really should scare us a lot more than getting our finger cut off. Some traumatic, smashing something with a hammer is what we worry about. What we should really be worried about is our long-term exposure to chemicals in the workplace, and that's why, again, OSHA is real important. And Niosh and Ansi, they do the research that OSHA uses to keep workers safe. So, references, go through this week's assignments and, go through the OSHA workers' rights, watch the SDS video, and I'll see you in class.